Hello, hello, hello out there on Facebook, YouTube, out there streaming on the internet. Good to see you. And we're about to let in our audience here on Zoom as well. Hello to our Zoom audience joining the program as well today. Welcome, everyone. We're about to get started with this program today. I'll give a little bit of intro if it's your first time. If you're checking us out on Facebook and YouTube, I'll give a little bit of a rundown of the show, a little bit of an intro, and then we'll dive into the conversation. Glad to have you here. It's a pleasure. Um, what is this program? This is Piano Tech Radio Hour. And what we do here is we meet every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable people in the piano world and related areas. This could include piano technicians, of course, manufacturers, musicians, makers of other instruments, rebuilders, and musicians of all sorts. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. You can also subscribe to Radio Hour for just $16 a month and get direct access to each week's private Zoom call, as well as all the archival recordings of over 200 episodes in the member area. You can join using the link bit.ly/join PTRH. In addition, you might as well check out the podcast. It's the audio-only versions of these episodes. You can check out while you're driving around, lifting weights at the gym, doing dishes, however you like to listen to your podcast. We're there while you're doing your work in the workshop. We're popular all over the world in the performing arts category and beyond on iTunes. And we've been as much as number 1, number 10, top 100 in various countries all over the world in the performing arts on iTunes. You can also check out the blog for in-depth behind the scenes content from our masterclass content. So we'll put it in blog form, give you a little bit of a taste, but this is the advanced stuff we're talking about, rebuilding, concert prep, refining your tuning methods, history of the piano, all sorts of really cool stuff. The design of the piano, stuff you can't find anywhere else. Additionally, make sure to check us out on the social medias, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and that basically covers it. I would love to introduce our guest for the day. His name is Ludovic Zamor. Ludovic is a Canadian-American concert pianist whose work is driven by a deep obsession with sound lineage and the expressive power of the Romantic era. From his first piano lesson at age 3 to his debut at Carnegie Hall, his journey has been one of relentless passion and precision. Known for his performances of Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, Liszt's Paganini Etudes, and Bach's Preludes and Fugues, he brings both emotional depth and technical brilliance to the stage. He's collaborated with artists like Joe Graziose and frequently performs at Steinway events on rare and historic instruments, trained by Maestro Avaraham Sternklar. Ludovic traces his musical lineage through Busoni and Liszt all the way back to Beethoven, a legacy that breathes through every note he plays. Ludovic, welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you for the intro, Ethan. It's an honor to be here. It's like I kept thinking about the metaphor this morning. Like if we are the astronauts, you guys are the people that put us there. You guys are the engineers, the mathematicians that did all the work to really, put us there. And we're just the ones in front of the camera, but in reality, you guys are the real unsung heroes.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We'll take that. We'll take that credit. um, you're the one that has to dance around on the moon. Make it look exciting.
Yeah.
Risk your life in front of the masses. Um, well, I always like to start at the beginning. So I mentioned in your bio, your first piano lesson was at age 3. I'm curious if you remember that. Is there any recorded evidence of that time in your life? Tell me about your childhood
There are
piano lessons.
terrible photos, like off of CVS disposable cameras and all that type of stuff. But we don't really have videos. We didn't really have like a big in the 90s. We didn't have those big, those. huge thing, so we didn't have that.
Yeah.
But my dad was my first teacher, and I started playing on an old like Baldwin SF10, and it's pretty funny. And I can we could talk about that here. The way we grew up, there was no air conditioning. There was
Mm.
no humidity control. There was none of that. So the piano was like the heaviest action of all time. So I think that might have been part of like teaching good technique. And but when you're growing up with it, you don't really realize that it was a blessing. But
Yeah. Every cloud has a silver lining, I suppose.
mhm.
And where was that? I know we talked about this before we started. You're in Long Island right now. Did you grow up in that area as well, or?
On the most part, I consider myself a Long Islander. I don't really say I'm like more of a Quebecer as I spent too long away from that place to really say that I'm like Canadian Quebecer now, but
Okay.
it's gone, I'm completely Americanized.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so what's the path there from that 3-year-old to, I guess, getting into the professional realm, you know? So at a certain point, you probably enjoy it. Maybe either you have very serious parents or serious teachers, or we're just kind of playing around until one day you go, wow, this is really serious. And then there's that sort of pivotal decision, usually around the 18 to 20, where you go, oh gosh, this is going to be my career, I think, you know, or could happen earlier. How did that evolve for you?
Uh, so my dad was my first teacher, and he taught me from roughly 3 to 6 or 7 years old. And around the 7-year old mark, that's when he started like hunting for a better teacher because we were getting on the precipice of how much he could really teach me with proper technique, as far as he knew. So we started shopping around with teachers, and then we found a godsend. Her name is Karen Femiamata. She's Long Island based. I guess shout out to Karen if you're listening. And she took me a lot further. But as far as the parenting, it was very strict. You know, imagining like Caribbean parents, those people were like Caribbean, that kind of stuff. So it was just very strict, and it's pretty funny now to think back at it. It was Karen would give a lesson, and on the way out, she would give like things that he needed to work on, and some of my mistakes or stuff I didn't really work on, and my parents would be like, "Okay," and then just a beating when you get home. So it's that type of stuff when you're growing up with and you're resenting it. So when you're growing up, you kind of don't really fall in love with it until well into adulthood. And
Mhm.
that's kind of like the model that I had. And most people have that, I think.
And so, talk about your practice routines at that age. Were you sitting there for? I mean, when you're 3, it can't. I don't know if you can practice longer than, I don't know, somewhere between 15 minutes an hour. But any longer than that, it's going to be pretty grueling. But and were you? So was your dad then sitting by your side, or how did you do your practice routines?
It was mostly he would sit in an armchair and it was right behind you. And he would just practice and just be like the most stiff person of all time. And it's pretty funny to like when you see like trending concert pianists today, they're very expressive and they're, flowing and it looks like, a magnetic performance. And then there's another school of thought where you have like the Horowitz where their face was like a mask and just completely unflinching. I think I was probably closer on the Horowitz side because you just had the fear right behind you. And it was just, but I think it was just in adulthood, you start to appreciate it more and you appreciate the discipline that it was instilled in you because that's what it takes to succeed, I think, in the performing arts.
Hmm. Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to be said for. It's kind of I mean, we talked about this a little bit. We've had various musicians on here who started young. Had another guest on recently. His dad was a violinist, and had the tiniest violin you could in the thing at the hospital, taking a picture of him next to it. Starting him out at like 3 or 4, and all this stuff. And and it's a certain lifestyle, and I feel like I'm a parent. I have a 7-year-old. He takes cello lessons. No, it's certainly not intense. There's been moments, where he's breaking down, he's crying a little bit because we're kind of saying, hey, let's keep at this. But for the most part, it's the carrot, rather than the stick. So for example, my wife will do M&M, like, okay, play this thing and you get an M&M. Yeah, play this thing, you get an M&M. But yeah, what you're talking about makes me kind of curious, from your perspective about that. As you probably taught as well, you've had various teachers, the sort of carrot and the stick side of external reinforcement when it comes to learning an instrument. Do you have any philosophies on that or
Uh,
experiences?
some people ask me in terms of like they are new parents. They ask like, "Oh, what would I do to get my kid that good?" And it's performance. It's a very it's it's a tough job to get into. Even if you're good, there's no promise that you're gonna succeed. So I look at it from a place of you're just teaching a kid the idea of work ethic and discipline. So if you instill that in a child, that's a great thing. But the idea of, pushing them to do something like that, I wouldn't really recommend it. You would have to be, you would have to have a family of musicians to push something like that. But as far as carrot and stick, I definitely think the carrot is so much better. The idea of having a musician fall in love with practice and the process, that is probably going to produce a better musician and a happier person in general than, just tormenting a child all day. That's not really fun.
Sure. Yeah, and you make a good point. I think like I've taught piano lessons, right? And especially when you've got those parents who are not professionals and maybe they know nothing about the piano at all, it can be very counterproductive for them to be very strict because they're probably giving the wrong advice or having the wrong idea of what their child should do, so they can sit there and say, hey, practice, I'm not hearing you practice, and the kid's like, I don't know, especially young kids, they don't even know what that means or what they're supposed to, and the parent doesn't know. You have all this kind of negative energy around it. It could be pretty counterproductive. But I hear what you say. If you have a musician and who's helping guide them, of course, they know how to guide that practice in a productive direction and be a little bit more focused with it.
Exactly.
So, and at that time, we'll move along a little bit more in your history at this point, and we won't make it into a therapy session, but but at what point do you feel like your parents were coaching you just to say, hey, you know what, we want this kid to take this seriously versus we want this kid to turn into an adult who's a professional?
That's a good question. I think I grew up in a place where my family was both realistic and at the same time they had aspirations. So when I went to school, I didn't just do music performance. I also studied bioengineering. So it was just like in case music performance doesn't work out, become a doctor. So you learn both at the same time. So it was never do this or die, but it was kind of, you know, let's have as many options as possible, but try your best in doing so. Don't just be lazy.
Hmm.
But I think roughly around 18, when I first went to Carnegie, that's when it really became an option. And it was like, okay, you could take this even further.
And in terms of your bioengineering studies, how did you enjoy that? Did you find it just like a road thing that you were going to take part in, or did you actually get into it and get interested?
Uh, I think it was a situation where I would be studying the material and my eyes would glaze over. Like there is the ability of being a test taker and just passing tests, and that's one thing. But falling in love with it and being passionate about it, that's completely the different, field. Like I could look at lists and I could read, books about lists and his transcriptions, and I'll never get tired. I could go to sleep at 4 o'clock in the morning, just keep on reading. But bioengineering and hearing about field experiments and that's kind of there's nothing there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So you picked the right path, put it
Yeah.
that way. Um, let's talk about that tangent that you just kind of mentioned here, studying the material of, classical music, piano music. Um, I'm sure that evolves like as you grow older, maybe as you become a college student and have advanced teachers. How tell me about your evolution of sort of getting into studying the art of the music and not just let me play the piece.
I think as you study a piece, you get to understand the composer's intentions a little bit more. And as you do that, you get to interpret in what's the word? To do it more justice. And I know there's a justice listening, so it's pretty funny to say that. Um, but for example, like I'm working on a project right now. It's going to be an album and everything and a recital program, and it's all Liszt transcriptions. So it's transcriptions of symphonies, of orchestral pieces, of voice and accompaniments. And even for those pieces that have lyrics, just knowing what these lyrics mean, you get to, I guess, have a more resolute performance and know what you're actually doing. Or if you listen to the original orchestral version or the symphonic version, you know what voices you're trying to bring out. And that research is so crucial that people are just overlooking. It's not just playing the music. You could just read the music and read these, I guess, translations from Italian, but it's not enough. You have to do your research.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's fascinating what develops as you study music. It becomes one of the things I was fascinated with as I grew as a musician, was okay, it's not just technically knowing how to play the notes and in fact, when you look at the breadth of what we call music, popular music, I think I always think of Bob Dylan as like an incredible example of like that's music and that is definitely music. And that guy can't really sing or play the guitar. So what's there,
It's
what's there? And it's the culture, it's the context, it's the history, it's the poetry, it's the fact that he can't sing and he can't play and he still has something to say. And I think of course when it comes to classical music there's a little bit more focus on technique. However, like you said, the more advanced that you get, the more you're thinking about the context of the music, right?
exactly.
I'm just there's a piece and I'll think of it here. I don't know. I I'm actually getting just a little bit more into listening to classical music myself. I studied jazz piano. I've had a fair amount of exposure to classical music, orchestral, instrumental, but haven't been one of those personalities that dives super deep, and sort of knows all the different artists and the different, performances of various pieces. But I have been listening to uh, some pieces lately, and I have been kind of blown away sometimes with listening to some pieces and just how beautiful the experience of listening to them can be. And not to bring in a different performer or context, but I think it's called Laudate Dominum. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a Mozart piece, and I'm sure it's a psalm or something. So I'm sure it's been written, put music and lyrics too, and all these different cases. But I've just heard a solo piano version of it recently, and I've heard orchestral versions. And man, just listen to it, and I just feel like I go off into some sort of a dreamland. It's just so beautiful, so beautiful. Um, Tell me about uh, some of your favorite pieces and artists, and how that evolved into you settling in on your favorites.
Oh, it's like choosing favorite child. I can't. I want to be able to begin, but I could say to bring a focus, I specialize in romantic era, and that's by far, in my opinion, the best era. So classical music is a very, very large umbrella. It's huge. You have on one end you have Bach, which is very early, or Baroque rather, and then on the latter end you have pushing to the turn of the century. So you have like Rachmaninoff and such. To the Romantic era, it's the pushing of both like the theories of tonal harmony and then also showing off the virtuosic side. So you have the best of both worlds, and it's both a thrill to perform and then also like appealing to the crowd. You could play modern music, and it may be, I guess, technically difficult, but it just takes a very special type of person to try and understand it. And that kind of goes with the impressionistic era. Um, but the romantic era, I think, is the best of both worlds. And um, I was actually talking to a friend about this yesterday, and it was it's really funny. Have you ever watched the movie with Adrian Brody, The Pianist? Everyone loves that movie.
Oh, I think so. Like a lot, it came out a while ago, maybe a couple decades ago, even,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And he
Yeah.
won a series of awards. I think, yeah, I can't even begin to tell you how many awards it won. And at, I think, the climax of the film, there was a scene, and I think every other pianist would look at that and just like, yeah, right. But he spent years or an X amount of time away from the piano, and essentially, I don't want to, say spoilers, but the movie came out how many years ago? If you didn't see it, now spoilers, who cares? At the climax of the film, he had to essentially play for his life, and there was a Nazi officer that asked, what was his occupation, and he said pianist, and he walked him downstairs, and then there was his piano, and he said, play for me. And then he proceeded to play the Chopin Ballade number 1, as if you could just play that without practice, without touching a piano for years. So it's the combination of both beauty. You have something that was just, as soon as you hear the first couple chords and the octaves, it just takes you somewhere else. And then you have the virtuosic side where you're doing what people consider like Bugs Bunny type movements. And that is what the romantic era is, both the beauty and then you're doing the showing off and all the virtuosic sides.
Hmm. Um, we may or may not have time have the time to go in this
Oh,
direction,
yeah.
but is there a performance that we should check out maybe while we're meeting here? So it could be maybe like a thing on Spotify or YouTube or something. Is there anything I should search for in maybe
Of
an
me,
example?
a perfect example right now of me. The album that I'm working on, the Liszt transcriptions, uh,
Hmm.
hence Liszt transcriptions, a bunch of other pieces. I am working on the Mendelssohn Wedding March, and there's a YouTube short of it. I think it's like 25 seconds, but it's like the perfect embodiment of taking a piece that everyone knows, and then you're adding the virtuosic side, and it's not
Okay.
bombastic, but it's just intricate and fun to watch.
Okay. And how long is it?
I believe it's 25 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, I think I found it. What's your favorite Liszt piano transcription?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let me pull that up. Give me 1 second. All right, so we go full screen on this. And yeah, I'll do this quick share. All right, gotta skip that. Share screen. Full screen. Share audio. Oops. Wow. That's fascinating, actually.
That's
Didn't expect that. Yeah, go ahead.
that's all Liszt transcriptions. Either you have a direct transcription like the Beethoven symphonies, and it's just a, I guess, transference and trying to add all the different voices, or you have a theme and variations where you have a theme, and then after that is just throwing it through the blender and just, you know, showing the capabilities of the instrument and the capabilities themselves. So those are
The
what's
music, I'm surprised. Like it almost gosh, it almost sounded like oh man, who am I thinking of? It sounded almost like a jazz, you
like,
know. I was surprised about that. Yeah.
yeah, especially because it's not just, well, people think classical and they think it's so rigid and so, in a key, but there is a little bit of travel.
Yes. and I'll think of, I'm trying to think of who the artist is. Art Tatum. Do you check into Art Tatum much?
That name sounds very familiar,
Yeah.
but
He
maybe.
was a blind piano player kind of in the early to mid 20th century. And he had that kind of flow, and it was kind of amazing because he's blind, right? But he could kind of pull out all these kind of crazy, crazy acrobatics, I guess, and polyphonies and harmonies and melodies. So yeah, very cool. Um, Tell me about your approach here as a professional. So it's fascinating at this particular point in time to see how people approach their careers, right? Some people are just like, um, somehow they found some following on Instagram and that's just like their thing, and from having like 5-second clips on Instagram as a piano player, now all of a sudden they're going out and doing concerts or maybe, they just play, maybe they just go through scores and play them and people love to see that, or, people have their different approaches to being professional. Some people have that more traditional route of, playing in concerts and touring and things like that. Some people teach a lot. Some people teach online and then tour a little bit. What what's your approach to your kind of career as a pianist? How do you think about it in this day and age?
I think there's a big responsibility, not just on me, but just as a concert pianist itself. It's like one of the hardest roles as a performing artist. So you have to have this, what's a good word of saying? The way I look at it is we have to have these standards and the 5 second clips and stuff. You could do that for marketing, but it should be more traditional, especially these performing artists. Like you go to the ballet, you experience it live. You're playing on, in some cases, and we're going to talk about it soon, like the art case pianos. Like some of these pianos are prohibitively expensive, but you go to Carnegie Hall, their piano Model D is like $250,000, and I guarantee witnessing it live is going to be better than looking out on your phone. So
Mm.
you have to do it justice, and you have to go into the halls. You have to go experience the acoustics. You have to listen to the instrument itself. Like I remember I invited a friend to one of my concerts once, and they were telling me that they never thought a piano could actually make their chest rumble because they never experienced something like that. They never thought that, like, oh, there's a bass, and most
Hmm.
people understand that, and their headphones are never going to reproduce that.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and especially the large pianos in the concert hall and the acoustics, and yeah, that's fascinating. Um, let's go over, you mentioned it briefly. You talked about your relationship to the piano technicians generally.
Mm.
One thing that we've come upon in previous episodes is that, any performance is a collaboration between the pianist, um, the technician, but also the maker of the instrument. They're producing it to be able to be performed on. Um, have you had any interesting experiences or encounters when it comes to working with you know, pianos, brands of pianos, technicians, specific situations?
Well, I have my own aspirations in the future, and with that being said, I would say Steinway pianos are the best, and I always aim for them. If there's a venue that has a Steinway piano, I'm just immediately happier. And it's like they have a standard of not just luxury, but precision, and the touch is always going to be something you're expecting. I've had pianos where I'm not going to disparage any brands, but the worst things could ever happen in a concert has happened to me on some of those pianos. Like you're doing a passage and one note sticks, and it's like you're falling down a hill after that, and the rest of the piece is like a wash. You can't really do anything with it. Steinways, you never have an issue like that. It feels like every note is regulated to precision, to perfection, and it's it's like playing on silk. It doesn't even feel like it's a metal string. It just feels like it's something else, and it's just a light instrument and also powerful, and it's just amazing.
Do you have a runner up?
Uh,
You have like Yamaha and Bosendorfer and
Definitely Boston Dover. Yeah, it feels like cheating on my wife if I say something like that, but I would say Boston Dover number two. Yeah.
about right. Yeah, that's always a lot of people have that fantasy of having the Imperial Bosendorfer Imperial. That's their kind of fantasy piano.
Yeah.
Um,
See, this is a
so
world for me because I've never tried to, I would never wish to try and infringe on your side. So I never like ask any of the mechanics. I just sit on the other side. Like when my tuner used to come, I would just leave the room and just stand there and just like, let him do whatever he's doing. It's not just simply, just tuning a wrench. There is a whole world of mechanics happening behind the scenes that I'm not even going to try and get into. And then there's probably a sense of guilt too, because he's probably seeing that I'm banging on it all day, and I just don't want to be there and have him judge me. But
hmm, well, I would actually push back against that a little bit. I would encourage you to if we do have to focus on what we focus on. Different people have their focuses, and that's fine. And you can sort of ignore other stuff. But I would say spend a little bit of time just learning about how the functionality of it, how it works. I think the one thing that we do as piano technicians that I think is probably the sign of some of the better technicians and part of our job that's a little bit counterintuitive or not as prominent is being able to communicate with the pianist.
mm,
And the better that you can communicate with the pianist, the better they can communicate with you, the better results you can get. So a lot of technicians will make the mistake of trying to talk to the pianist in the technician's lingo. Oh, the jack is missing here, and the right. Like,
exactly.
oh, okay, thank you. Um, the versus an understanding that when pianists and musicians say things, it's maybe they call it, what do they call it, like a homonym, like a word that sounds like it means this, but it actually means something else to the person who's saying it. So it's common, for example, for probably not the professional as much as some of the amateurs at home. They'll say, "A note is flat." Well, that could be anything from the pitch is flat, which is the very obvious answer, to the pitch is sharp, to it's out of tune, to the key is sticking, to it's a little bit dull and the tone is off. So you have to really be able to translate. And then on the other side of that, if a pianist is willing or has had some experience in that exploration, it makes it a whole lot easier to communicate to the technician and kind of get out of it what you can. So I would encourage you, don't be so shy about it. You can get your hands dirty. Just don't go claiming to the technician that you could fix something yourself. That'll piss them off.
Also, but I know a couple people. My piano tuner, shout out to Michael Higgins. He just retired, and as he retired, I was kind of like telling people that he's gone and he left me. And I feel like a disgruntled girlfriend. And they were recommending piano tuners. They're just coming off as if it's just simple wrenching. Like that's
Yeah, yeah,
you guys don't know what you're talking about. It's
yeah. Do you remember the name of your technician that you've been using?
Michael
Curious. Michael what?
Michael Higgins,
Higgins. Okay. All right.
the kindest guy of all time. He's forgiven me for breaking strings. Yeah.
Not your fault. It's not your fault. It just happens.
Mm.
That's actually one thing that there's a common misconception there, which we have to. I train piano technicians and send piano technicians out there in New York as well, and we have to train the technicians to communicate very clearly with the clients. Like when strings break, it's very rare that it's because like the piano technician did something wrong for it to break. It's usually because it's kind of close to the breaking point, and
Mhm.
then you're just doing something and then it breaks. So um, breaking strings as a concert pianist is a badge of honor, in my opinion. I don't think you're doing anything wrong. You're
Yeah.
just playing that piano and it happens. So I wouldn't worry about that.
I remember years ago, my dad was giving me a piece of advice like when you're trying to buy a piano, never buy a piano from an ex-pianist because imagine a car that's been driven 12 hours.
That I could agree
And
with.
I'm sitting on this thing 12 hours a day. It's
Yeah.
tired, it's exhausted.
Yeah, that's funny. We've talked to some violinists recently, and they're in the violin world. I don't know. I don't know if you know where I'm going with this. So there's a component of a violin that adds significantly to its value. It's one of the major components of the violin. Do you know what that is?
I'm
Based
not.
on what we're talking about?
No.
Who played it before? So actually, if
Like,
your violin was played by some, other famous, historical figure in the history of the instrument, well, then it's now got more value. But you're totally right. With
yeah,
the
polar opposite.
piano, it's just going
Yeah,
to get worn down and used up. Yeah.
exactly. Polar opposite. Um, there was actually I was offered a piano once to play for a concert, and it was Liberace's X piano, and I was like, it was exactly everything you thought it would be. It was bedazzled. It was. But imagine a tired piano that's bedazzled. So on the exterior, looked
Yeah.
completely glamorous. On the interior, just
Are you familiar with Cecil Taylor, the jazz musician?
no. Jazz is
So yeah, so Cecil Taylor is kind of like he's kind of one of the signature out there pianists. And so you watch him sit down at the piano. He's passed at this point, but and he's just kind of like he's just kind of you're like, is he doing that on purpose? Like, does he have a plan there? But it sounds cool. Like he's just kind of like going nuts on that instrument. And there's a lot other. He lived in New York, and there's a couple of technicians that I know who had worked on his piano, and he had literally worn down the ivories into the wood from his playing. And they had sent me pictures of this. It's crazy. Can
that's
you even imagine?
impressive.
Yeah,
Hard work, huh?
yeah. But it says something about how intensely he played that instrument, and it's kind of like you said. Yeah, you could get Cecil Taylor's piano as like a collector's item because hey, Cecil Taylor played this, but it's not necessarily going to mean it's going to perform well for you.
Exactly. It reminds me of I know that we said that we are going to speak about it, but our case pianos and such.
Oh
And
yeah.
one experience that I had was this was years and years ago. I can't remember. Maybe it's 2017. But Steinway, they reached out and they asked my father and me to go to Steinway Hall in New York City, and they were going to do a grand unveiling of this mysterious thing that they've been working on. And as we got there, synonymous with Steinway, glamour, extravagance, luxury. And the event was sponsored by Silicon Eye, so they're just giving out vodka, bottles of vodka and stuff. And it turns out it was the grand unveiling of the pictures at an exhibition, the Paul Weiss art case piano,
Hmm.
and that was probably the only piano I've ever seen in my entire life that I said I would not play on because the amount of I have like the idea of yeah, it's a piano, you play on it, who cares? But even if it's Steinways are known to be prohibitively expensive, but it is a piano, it is an instrument, you're supposed to play on it. But this one, the legs were clocks, and there was gold ornate everywhere, and they had this short video beforehand, and they were talking about the making of it. And in the video was Paul Weiss, and he was clean shaven, and he was talking about the glazing process and the detail that he went into making all of it. And then afterwards, when he was unveiling it, he had this big like lumberjack, Brahms like beard, and it was pretty hilarious. And I was like, "Who's this guy?" And it took me a moment to register that it was the same person, and it just took years of his life.
Just to
you know,
create this thing.
exactly. But I said to myself, that piano, I can't really like, even if they offered to play on it, or even if it was something light, I would not even touch it because it's so delicate. And that's the polar opposite of Cecil, like you're mentioning, where his ivory was completely worn down. That's
How about so you were talking about art case instruments, historical instruments. Have you delved into that much or not?
not so much.
Okay. Yeah. Um, Tell me about the album uh recording and sort of planning process. And how far along are you? Have you recorded all the tracks? Are you sort of mid track
Uh,
recording?
I would say I'm pretty mid with it. And then at the same time, well, I'm going to leave it to the marketing people to come up with what is a proper timeline because it becomes a question of do you want to tour with it first or do you want to record it and then put it out? And then my idea is if you record it, then you put it out. When you have a concert, some people might feel cheated because they want to go experience something new. So part of me wants to tour with it first, and then when I'm good and ready, record it and then put it out. But the process of it all, I spent about 2.5 years coming up with a brand new program. And there were pieces that were going to play beforehand, but I just scrapped them. And, or you learn half of it and then you choose another piece. And you have to think of a grand theme and like a emotion you want to go with. But this took me about 2 years to finally come up with a program and learn it. And I'm in the process of perfecting it.
And how did you how did you choose the kind of sequencing of it? Are you still working that out as well, or yeah?
There is almost like an arc. It starts with Beethoven, it ends with Beethoven. They are all Liszt transcriptions. So it
Hmm.
starts, I'm not gonna actually, unless you would like me to expose the program, but it starts with the Seventh Symphony of the Beethoven Allegretto movement, and then it ends, and we'll be in the concert, an encore of the Ode to Joy, or an excerpt of it. Not the whole 20-minute piece. That's torture for an audience, but just a 4-minute excerpt of the Ode to Joy where the climax is. And there's just a large arc of, you have like the very classical side of it, and then you have the showy and more romantic side where you have the Schumann. But it it took some time to come up with something poetic, and that's what I try to do. It's not just simply playing pieces, or it's not just trying to show off. I'm trying to have at least, some sort of dialogue with the audience.
Tell us more about Liszt's transcription process. So their trans this is not something I'm deeply aware of. So I'm going to ask some naive questions, but that's great. I'm sure you'll have the answer. So
Oh,
like number one, I'm thinking, well, of course, these days there's already a transcription of everything. AI is going to do it for you, whatever. So it's a different world. So I could get a transcription. Somebody did it of all kinds of different things. And also composers put out their own scores of things. Um, under what circumstances is Liszt going to be transcribing things? And is it sort of orchestral to piano? Is that what we're talking about? Or what consists of the transcription process?
uh, so I would say, trying to be a listician myself and trying to specialize with Liszt, there are two sides of Liszt. There is the more spiritual side, and that was when he was a little bit older. And then when he was in his prime, which was his 30s, and at that time, he was definitely an egomaniac. So where there's actually a story here. Liszt actually secluded himself at one point in life, and he went into some monastery and just the side of the mountains. So imagine a very famous person, I guess like a modern day Katy Perry, or like a pop artist. Imagine that person taking themselves out of society. And he did that, and he said to himself, "I'm going to break down the Beethoven symphonies." So we're talking about how many instruments and condensing it and putting it into voices for a solo instrument. And that was like a meditation for himself. That was almost spiritual for him. And then the other side of it, when he was younger, the piano is the master of all instruments. It's the most difficult to master and then the easiest to, pick up in the beginning. And him being an egomaniac, he wanted to prove to everyone two things. First off, he's the best. And then the second thing is the piano is the best. So he would try to not take other people's music, he would transcribe other people's music, i.e., Paganini, who people accused of being like making pacts with the devil and such. And that was,
Oh, that's been proven. Yeah, that's been
yeah,
proven.
exactly. Was definitely, yeah. In the 1800s, just witches, all this stuff. So people would accuse other people of making pacts with the devil, and that's how good they were. And Liszt said, like, oh, that person's good, but let me show you where the real ceiling for human potential is. And he would take, for example, the Caprices by Paganini, and transcribed them solely for piano. And that's how you got the La Campanella. You got the Etude number 6, which is in my program. And he did that purely off of Vico. He took their theme and then ran away with it. And he did everything Bugs Bunny you can imagine with. And that's what Liszt transcriptions are. You have both the, I guess, the most pure translation, and that's like the Beethoven symphonies. And then you have the Mendelssohn Wedding March, where it's the theme, you hear it, and then it's in this very elaborate, virtuosic way, and very bombastic and showy. And
So at that point, you have to make a deal with someone even more evil than the devil.
yeah, but I'm trying to think of something, but I'm not gonna say anything political.
That's extended. That's extended to popular music. Yeah, that all got to like I think it was Robert Johnson, the guitarist. Of course, this said that about Bob Dylan, various artists of modern day, and it's a deal with the devil at the crossroads. And oftentimes it also not only the mythology around it is not only that they're really good, but there's a mythology around it that they're just kind of like average at one time. Like they're just walking around. Oh, you saw that? Oh yeah, I saw like Bob Dylan showed up at that thing or whatever. Da, da. And then like they go away or something for a few months or a year or whatever, and then they come back on the scene, and everybody's like, "What happened?"
That's obsession.
Yeah, yeah.
Something else.
Um,
Something else.
so how do you think about we'll be wrapping up here in the next 10 minutes or so, but how do you think about your career long term? Is there a trajectory you're aiming for? Is kind of playing it by ear, pun intended? Um, where are things headed for you?
Uh, I am trying to remain as much of a purist as I can without, I guess, metaphorically selling my soul and doing stuff that I would think is tacky. Like I'm not going to disparage anyone and mention them by name, but one thing that I found that was like pretty funny years ago, and I was laughing at Karen as we were watching it, but there was a cellist and he was having like a YouTube short or something, and his shirt was like buttoned down to here, and he was just like very saucy and gross, and he had hickeys all over his neck, and I'm just ever just kind of it was just trashy.
Or taste?
Yeah, so I'm trying to, and the worst thing about it, he was good. So you can't really hate on him. But I'm trying to both remain a purist and do due diligence to the art form, and at the same, you know, I guess get to as many people as possible because I think the world is kind of what's the opposite of spoiled, but they don't realize that there's higher art forms and they're just getting this very rudimentary, you know.
Sure. Yeah, especially these days. Yeah, it is. Well, I'm both reassured and discouraged in various days in various domains. I mean, one of the things that I found exciting as I continue we used to mostly just do piano technicians and talk about, the instrument and the technical side of it. And I've expanded into having musicians, and then it's tended to make sense to do classical musicians a little bit more than popular musicians because they're more connected to the acoustic instrument. And, as I'm searching and looking for folks, it is really reassuring to see how much activity there is on like social media and groups. And you can see that there's an interest in sort of classical music and orchestral music and concert music that you don't necessarily encounter as you're walking around talking to the average person, but there's a strong following. People are curious, and it's varied ages, and varied backgrounds, which is exciting. Um, and on the other side of things, I think that the the fidelity of the music, right, has degraded, and people don't even realize it. Like we're all listening to MP3s, and even if it was a wave file, you'd be getting more out of that music. If you, like you said, if you went to a concert and listened to it in person, oh my God, that would be so much more rewarding. We also talked recently about chamber music, just, hey, what if we actually had people over to our houses to play music again, and people are doing that, of course, here and there, but gosh, why not? I so much like that idea more than Oh, let's turn on Netflix, or like you said, watch the music on YouTube or something like that. It's accessible, but gosh, the richness is just so degraded, right?
Exactly. It reminds me of another metaphor. One of my very good friends, his name is Rigo. He works in film, and he was telling me that just imagine you spend your entire life, you rent these cameras, you produce this film that's meant on the silver screen, and then someone's going to watch it off their phone, like with the comforter over their head. It doesn't do it justice. It's meant for the proper medium.
Yeah. And as much as we can draw people into that, it's a challenge, but I think creatively, at least there's certain audiences that will do that. I'll invite you next time we do this. So I have the piano tuning company in New York. It's called Floating Piano Factory. And, we have this, fascinating cadre of clientele, I mean, you're in New York City, so we've got concert musicians, we've got Emmy and Grammy winners and nominees, and um, and also we have average people with kids, but and then you have like the doctors and the lawyers or the wealthy people that live on the top floor of a high rise next to Central Park or something. And so fascinating people. And I always have been thinking, oh, we got to bring these folks together. So we did a cute little event at a brewery in Gowanus, Brooklyn, and we had a variety show where we gave each performer maybe like 10 to 15 minutes and to do a little bit. And but yeah, I mean the caliber of people that are showing up is fascinating, right? We had a couple of we had an Emmy nominee and a Grammy winner on the roster. For some reason, they both had emergencies; they couldn't make it. But we had a set of pianists over at Juilliard, an Israeli and a Palestinian, and they did four-hand pianos, and it was just like, oh my gosh, the most beautiful music, the most beautiful concept. Just bring those people together and get in a room with such cool people and just listen to music. So I'll reach out next time we do that to you. Hopefully you can participate in.
It'd be an honor. Thank you.
Yeah. Or maybe we'll invade your house. It looks pretty cozy there.
Yeah, we have listening parties. I've actually wanted to have a listening party for a while, and it's a good concert prep. So
Yeah, let's bring the party over there. Invite myself over. I might have to sleep on the couch. That looks like a relatively comfy couch. Although I see the corner of it.
it's funny because I hunted for those couches for a long time after I watched John Wick, and I was just like hunting for them, and I finally found them. And then you realize being an adult how expensive furniture is, and I'm like, I'm never doing this again. But
The Chesterfield, yeah?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
Good
I
night.
like that. I love those. Those are good. All right, so we are about to sign off. I'll do the outro and whatnot, but I always like to give the final opportunity, final words of wisdom, send people to a link or a website, or of course you're going to plug your album and things like that. But how would you like to part with us today?
Uh, as far as concerts coming up, I'm still waiting on official paperwork, and it's like, you can't really say it legally. So I would say just follow me on social media, on Instagram. It's my name, Ludovic Zamor, and I guess subscribe to my website and such. And just stay tuned, and everything's like be coming up very, very soon.
Great. All right, and you reminded me just because it's so apparent now. I just have to ask about your name. So you said like you had some Caribbean parents, but I don't know. This sounds like
Oh, yeah.
somehow like Eastern European or something, or
Yeah.
yeah. Where does your name come from?
My full name is Michel-Ange Ludovic Zamor. So we are Canadian. I guess my parents they spoke French, and it was just a passed down name from wherever. And I'm the only odd duck that didn't speak many languages. Like my mom spoke Italian, Spanish, French, broken English, and my dad he spoke. Well, granted, the school that he went to it was free, but the catch of it being free is you had the curriculum being the hardest thing in the world. So he spoke Greek and Latin and all that stuff. So we just grew up being very diverse.
And both of your parents are Caribbean?
Yes.
Oh wow. And then to Canada and then to New York. Fascinating. Yeah, fascinating background.
Very cool.
Um, all right, I'll do our outro. We'll sign off, and then after I sign off, you and I can jump back on for a wrap up here. But this is the end of another musical journey here at Piano Tech Radio Hour. Thanks again to Ludovic for joining us today. As always, we're brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, cutting edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. If you joined us today by signing up for this session individually, make your life more convenient. Sign up for Piano Tech Radio Hour, just $16 a month. Get the recording of today's session in a member area, as well as automatic registration for each week's new session. Sign up at bit.ly/join PTRH. That's bit.ly/join PTRH. Don't forget to check out the podcast at pianotechradio.com, the blog at Substack, and follow us on all the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and visit that website, pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. You can also sign up for our email list. You get updates about these upcoming programs, find out how to join and participate regularly. And with that, we'll do a sign off. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Thank you.